There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else, and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing. The chairman of the conference, who's a former minister, will be able to select those who are in agreement with the First Minister. The focus on independence is already being said by her critics to be an excuse so that she doesn't have to discuss any of the other policies on which she's coming a cropper. There are a great many minuses in the Scottish Government's handling of the government of Scotland at present. The health situation is not brilliant, other than leaving aside the COVID pandemic. There are huge and growing waiting lists for any kind of operation, partly because of the COVID situation, but also because of opposition parties claiming that the nurses and doctors are short-staffed. The massive hospitals, one in Glasgow and another one in Edinburgh, have both been opened after long delays. There's a huge public inquiry due to start into the cost of especially the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow, which is massively overrun and is not functioning properly. The other thing that she said she wants to be judged on is what's called the attainment gap between rich and poor households. There's a huge gap between the levels of achievement from kids in the richer areas of Scotland, say the leafy suburbs in Glasgow and Edinburgh, compared with the grades and the life chances of children from the poorer household. And she said she wanted to be judged on closing that gap, but she hasn't. The fact remains that she hasn't closed that gap. In fact, it's much the same, if not worse, than it was a few years ago. And then on the economy, we're now in a situation, recent figures proved, that the Scottish population is being even more heavily subsidised by the rest of the UK than it has been in the past. I think it's something like over £2,000 per head extra is spent in Scotland than is spent elsewhere in the UK.
Be under no illusions. The Scottish people will pay back that borrowing just as much as anybody in any other part of the UK. This is not free money, this is not international aid bestowed upon us by an overgenerous UK government. This is money they have borrowed to fund interventions because they have held onto the powers entirely themselves.
And also, there's a massive budget deficit in Scotland. That, in other words, the money she's spending is not anywhere near being matched by the taxes she raises. I think the gap is something now about 30-odd billion, which is a huge, huge increase. And of course, if it wasn't for the UK Treasury, there's something like 900,000 jobs being propped up in Scotland by the UK Treasury, not by the Scottish Government. They just could not afford the money that Rishi Sunak has been pouring into furlough schemes, self-employment schemes. Perhaps the biggest black mark against Nicola Sturgeon's government is the appalling level of drug deaths in Scotland. They're currently the worst in Europe.
Behind every single one of these statistics is a human being whose life mattered. Someone's son or daughter, mother or father, brother or sister. And I am sorry to every family who has suffered grief.
We shouldn't have had a situation where the number of people dying from drug-related harm in this country has doubled under her watch. We can't afford a First Minister that takes their eye off the ball for the prepared topic, which is independence.
So all in all, if it wasn't for her being able to rally her troops over independence, I think her conference would be a fairly sorry affair, because there'd be lots of criticism if the nationalists were interested in anything other than independence. Sadly, I'm afraid they're not really interested. I think they'd rather live in a hole in the ground and eat crow, as long as they're independent. It's a very crazy situation, which Nicola Sturgeon at her conference is determined to bank.